Well, good morning. It is so good to be on the webinar with Welcome. I'm here with my friend Heather, and I'm Michelle Warren, and we are excited to be able to connect with you and talk a little bit about our trip to Oaxaca. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it a little over to, first of all, over to Heather and have her introduce herself. Heather, tell us a little bit about yourself. A little bit about just your life and a little bit about what you do. Tell us a little bit about Don't Mom Alone, kind of where you're from. Help us get to know you this morning.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heather MacFadyen. I am a mom of 4 boys that are ages 7 to 13. I'm married to Bruce, and we live in Dallas, Texas. I'm the host of the podcast Don't Mom Alone, and I was invited by this wonderful gal and Tess Clark to join them to go on their trip to Oaxaca and learn more about immigration and migrants traveling from the Northern Triangle, which I learned that term, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And it was an eye-opening trip on a lot of levels for me.
That's so great. Well, just to give a little bit of context, we at Welcome have done a couple border trips. And this time we just invited a group of evangelical leaders, women leaders, to come observe with us. We had a little idea of what we might see, but really it was learning for all of us. I always find it interesting that even though I lead trips and I in theory know all of the details, all I'm doing is learning and pivoting to new things. And so it's always a great opportunity to go, but one of the reasons we went was the last 2 trips that we've taken before Oaxaca was really just right to the border to see what was happening at the border. And the reality is the story starts way before people arrive to our borders seeking asylum. Many of them are women, children, family units. And we just figured as women, we wanted to see a little bit deeper into the story. So we went to Oaxaca, Mexico. And if you look at a map, you'll see it's closer to the southern tip of Mexico, right before you get into some of the countries that Heather mentioned. So we were trying to enjoy the culture. We're trying to meet people, trying to get a good pulse of those in Oaxaca, but also speaking to migrants along the journey. So looking really more at the push factors. Why are people even coming? Tell us your story as you've kind of come to Mexico, and what are your hopes and your dreams and aspirations as you move forward. So we got to take that trip right after Easter. And, I know Heather, for me as a woman, as a mother, that was, and leading an all women's trip, and most, so many of the women that we had being moms, I was really excited to meet up with other women that were there. I was really grateful that they were so generous with their stories. And I'm just wondering if there's some reflections or stories that you would want to share about that time with some of the mothers there.
Yeah, I would say I knew 2 girls on our trip. And so it's always interesting to meet new women and women who are doing amazing things. Getting to know their stories and where they're coming from and their perspective. I think I learned just as much from them as I did even from the migrants that we met. I think it was a joint my eyes were opened, not just by meeting the migrants, but also by the women who are on the trip and their unique perspectives as we were engaging with those from other countries and engaging this crisis of what's happening and the violence and just the extortion and the fear and of families. And as a mom, connecting with other moms on the trip with that sadness. We had this communal grief. What would it be like if I was that mom and I had to choose safety for my kids or traveling through a foreign country? What would I choose? And just feeling sad that they had to make the choice. I think that was our first level of emotional connection. And then wondering, my eyes were opened by Tasha Morrison, who leads the Be the Bridge racial reconciliation. So you're talking about a whole nother ministry and demographic that she's working with. It's not immigration directly, but even just how she processes that reconciliation was enlightening to me as I'm entering into this grief. So then what do I do with that grief?
Mm.
She said, pity is not helpful. And I was like, what? What do I do with that? So that was even a moment of reckoning for me is, okay, we feel sad. We feel sad that this is the reality for these moms. And then Tasha's telling me pity isn't helpful because you often don't activate when you feel pity. And so then you don't move forward with that sadness. And I think as I connected with those other moms in our place of grief, and then having Tasha's voice to say, okay, now what are you going to do with it? That was all super helpful. As in the moment, in a 48-hour period, we're processing a lot of new information and a lot of emotions.
You know, when you mentioned 48 hours, it just dawned on me that it was only 2 days. It felt like we were there for at least a week because we were seeing.
A lot happened.
I know it. Another phrase you've used a little bit just in this last few minutes was, eyes to see. My eyes were open. And I love that you're using that language because at Welcome, we talk a lot about, especially on the trips, God, give us eyes to see. Let us see what's really what you're seeing and give us a heart to respond the way you would want us to respond. And I think that's what vision broadening trips are all about. And that was the purpose of the trip. There wasn't any type of humanitarian service. That was not the purpose of the trip. The purpose was to see and to try to see even more deeply. And I'm wondering if, as you reflect back on that trip, we've been talking more on big overall emotions and things that we interacted with or saw. Is there anybody who you kind of carry in your heart, like a story that you might have had, even especially around, you have your podcast, Don't Mom Alone. Was there even a story that you're like, wow, this is a sense of community I hadn't thought of in, Oaxaca, or this is such a lonely journey? I just am curious to know, just from that lens of mothering alone, and then having your eyes open to that, maybe some specific interaction or interactions that you had that you'd be willing to share with us.
Yeah, so we got our schedule and our agenda, and because of logistics, we had to switch some things around. And so even if my mind had been ready that we were going to see children who were separated from their families, so unaccompanied minors, whether they were Mexican nationals or they were children from other countries or children who'd been deported from the U.S. and were in this center, I was ready, right? I was ready, but I was already sad. I was sad anytime you think of an orphanage-like situation as a mom, your heart grieves because you want to believe your role is important. Mm-hmm. And so a child without that important person in their life makes a mom sad. And yet we got there, and yes, I was sad, and I was told not to let them see me cry because they're not sad. Mm-hmm. That's their reality. That's what they know. I did not expect to walk in and see children with children. And what I mean by that is moms. I minister to moms. I wasn't expecting those moms to be as young as 11. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, for a lot of us that were on the trip was the standout moment of meeting this girl who's 11 who just had her baby at the center a week before. Mm-hmm. And so what that communicated to me is this child, because I have an 11-year-old boy, this child, she did not choose this. So one, there's the violence again, the reminder of the violence and the lack of safety for some of these girls, a lot of these girls. And then the fact that she's now in a role that I know 20 and 30-year-old women are struggling mm-hmm. to negotiate and navigate, and to see her with that baby and to be able to confidently tell her she's a good mom made me strip away all these formulas and books and strategies that in the United States were throwing at moms, and it simplified it. Mm-hmm. She was loving and caring for her baby, and that made her a good mom. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of things were happening at the same time. I'm thinking about her journey and her story and this baby and all that she's having to sort through as a girl. And then I'm thinking of my moms back home that I minister to, and how can I bring this to them to kind of chill out a little bit? Like, chill out. You have it really great, but not in a guilty way, just more of a help open their eyes to see that we're complicating something that doesn't need to be complicated. I also met a 14-year-old mom of an 8-month-old, and she had her baby at the center 8 months previously. Her mom had to keep going because the center is just for unaccompanied minors, and her mom wouldn't have had a place to stay while her daughter was having her baby and taking care of a newborn. So the mother of this girl kept going, and this girl said her mom was in America, but unclear on where in America. And her hope was in 4 years to then join her mom. So in my mind, I'm projecting 4 years from now, her traveling across all of Mexico, maybe with a guide who may or may not be a nice person, with a 4-year-old in tow. We all know that's really hard, 4 and 5-year-old boy. And then what kind of welcome would she get? Mm-hmm. Would we see her as this child who's trying to find her mom? Would we see her as a human? Would we see her made in the image of God? How would she be received? And so I think there was a grief and a little fear for her in that future journey. She was so hope-filled that this was going to happen in 4 years. And so I thought, okay, we've got 4 years to get this figured out. Right. She's in my head for the next 4 years. I think what trips like this do is, like we've been saying, they open your eyes. They humanize what can become a political issue. I was reading in 2 Kings today, the first chapter, and it's kind of complicated, the whole story, but basically the king sends a captain and 50 troops to Elijah to get a word from the Lord on whether this king's going to live or die. And he sends them, and Elijah basically like calls down fire on the first group and then calls down fire on the second group of 50. And then the third group, the captain gets on his knees and he says, "Please see my life as precious. Please see my life as precious." And Elijah doesn't call down fire, and he goes with that group and he goes to the king. And he says the same word he always did, but it made me realize we always have an option to change how we've been dealing with a situation and to see lives as precious. Yeah. Whatever life, whatever stage that life is in, whatever age, whatever gender, whatever religious belief, that life is precious. So anyway.
No, that's so good. I actually took time just to write that down because I think I'm going to go ahead and revisit it, and just the whole posture of please see my life as precious. Just having been there with you and having different conversations. I don't know if we were ever, having a similar conversation. It's interesting because where I was gravitating to were the young boys, the ones that were 14, 15, 16, 18, because my sons right now are 21 and 17. So they were a little younger, but not much. And in each one of the contexts that I was in, the young men were just saying, I need to work for my family. I needed to leave, just telling a very similar narrative. And then it was the same idea. Please see my life as precious. Please let me do this. You could tell that they were coming into manhood, that they, were opportunity for their family. They recognized it. They embodied it. And the only obstacle they had was, would we let them in and see that they could contribute? I know I had several conversations. They were like, can you just tell Americans that we are not criminals, that we don't want to do bad things, that we don't like criminals? It wasn't a fun, I shouldn't be smiling, but it was a very sad time, just as an American listening, wondering, what would be greeted, how would they be greeted at our borders, and knowing what I know and reading what I've read, not with grace, not with the value that they, just deserve around the Imago Day, but just like, I just have concerns too. And I'm carrying some of those stories in my heart as well. We're coming up on an anniversary. About a year ago is when this story about families being separated at the border came to light. We've been separating families for a long time. Our country has been for a long time, but the sheer volume and just some of that zero tolerance policy increased the severity of it, the frequency of it, and of course, we have still thousands of kids who are in detention as a result of it, even today. And so, that I don't want to miss the opportunity to say that we're at a pretty significant anniversary. And I'm just wondering, just some of your thoughts from your experience from Oaxaca, or even just in this last year, just some thoughts and some reflections of where we've been, and where you've been that you might want to share with us.
So I don't know what moms are watching, but for me personally, I avoid the news. I avoid the news. I avoid local news. I avoid any online news. I've got enough with the people I know and the prayer requests I have and the kids that I'm raising, that more bad news. I just, my soul is not at a place where that's healthy for me. So I don't think that I'm very up to date on what's going on in the world until something like that happens. And then you're like, wait, what? and your social media starts, the news starts hitting Instagram. Instagram's usually the safest place of all the places. All the happy things happen on Instagram. Twitter's more political. Facebook is divisive, but Instagram's the happy place until you start separating children from their parents, and those pictures start coming by, and you're like, wait, what is going on? And I felt like it was like I went from completely clueless about anything to just in shock that this is a reality. I think it was extremely shocking if you are a human. And then if you are a mom in particular, it's hard to fathom what was happening outside of politics. I mean, I come from an extremely, extremely conservative background. My dad was in politics. He ran for office for governor, Senate, Congress. And so he's was a Fox News junkie, and that was my upbringing. But I just was not interested in any of that. I think it took, to me, it wasn't a political thing. This was a human crisis where a lot of people were coming to the border all at once, and I don't think anybody knew what to do. Yeah. And I didn't know until I went on this trip that those at the border were not all Mexicans. Like, I didn't even know that fact. I didn't know that these were people from other countries. And I didn't know that those people from other countries were fleeing evil. We're fleeing gangs. And you could be a really upstanding business owner, and a gang could come in and want to take away 50% of your profits or more, or kill you. I had no idea that that was what was going on in Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala. I knew that our church went to Guatemala, and we did a VBS there. And everyone seemed pretty safe on that trip. And I'm sure there are, just like in America, there are cities where there's more crime in rural areas. But if you're listening or you're watching and you're similar to me and you're not watching the news, or this is new information, I think where we are a year from ago, at least for me personally, is having no clue of what's going on at our borders beyond, I knew immigration as friends who'd come over from Africa, or friends who had come over from Syria or Iraq, not this border immigration situation. I think it opened our eyes to that. And so then I think it's been, okay, now what do we do with that information? So now we're a year out. And for me personally, being someone who's not in the loop, I think I'm leaning in and listening and learning about something I was clueless before.
Yeah. You hit something that I feel is kind of common among many women that I've interacted with, which is such a disdain for politics and partisanship, which I think whether you're in it or not could identify with it, right? But just what I'm hearing is, I don't want to even look at it. And so I'm missing seeing the humanity of it. That was kind of something that you used, sort of the politics and just the partisan and the ugly. I'll just say Twitter is a blood sport. It really,
Cesspool. Just a
Instagram is a
cesspool.
happy place. I mean,
Yeah,
just totally different. I hope
totally.
it stays that way for all Instagram users. But this idea that I just don't want to see that hard, and it's not because I'm not a feeling person. It's not that I couldn't care. I do care. I care really deeply with what I see in front of me. But what I'm hearing from you is like, you know what, I've seen things, got my attention last year. I continue. I mean, the Lord allowed you to go on this trip. There's lots of opportunities, that you're seeing things differently. And now you don't have the luxury to look away. But what I'm also hearing is that you're recognizing the distinctiveness between maybe a partisan political conversation with the humanity and the need to really learn and know about that. Am I
Yeah.
hearing you correctly?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think we all have our history going into any situation. And for me personally, it was just such
Yeah,
a
sure.
aversion to the whole thing that, like you said, it was a block to me getting involved. And like you said, I have one son who's extremely sensitive to others' emotions, if someone's hurt, to the point that if someone gets cut, he looks away. And that looks like he doesn't care, but it's actually that he cares too much that he can feel what they're feeling. So sometimes those of us that yes, we have the privilege to opt out, which even my eyes are open to the privilege that we've been given to opt out of these conversations. They're looking away because they can't take it.
Yeah.
They see the pain, they see the problem, and they don't know what to do about it.
No.
I've talked to some moms since my trip, and one mom got really defensive, super defensive, like saying, well, what do you want me to do? Go to Honduras? Do you want me to leave my family and go to Honduras? I said, I didn't say anything. I literally just told her the stories of what I saw, and her take was that she needed to go. And so I think we think, okay, if that's my option is that I need to go and make things better in another country, which that's really more of a savior complex. God doesn't need you to do that. He's capable. But what is our role? So that's a God and you conversation. And so
I also think it's a good conversation to have in community, right?
yeah.
That's something you and I have debriefed individually as our group with Oaxaca. Like there's still an opportunity that we shared that other people are like, Michelle, Heather, that's just not fair. Why are you, that's not something I've been able to experience. But I think that that's some of the ways I think we need to respond, which is I don't know. And maybe instead of just jumping, to something really big, how can I create spaces where I'll learn a little bit more? It may not even be going to the border or to Oaxaca like we had that opportunity to do, but I think that's really the purpose of Welcome's platform is, how can I lean in a little bit more? And what we have seen is that thousands of women, are really interested in leaning in and learning more. And I think, just even calling out some of the distinctives that you're sharing is really helpful because I don't think we even share about that. Like, I have such a heart for people. I'm almost afraid to look, because I don't know what to do with it. And so I think that probably just tees up a good question. I mean, one of the things that I often will say is, it shouldn't be just a left and right conversation. We need to create a third way. We need to welcome people into a third way. This is a humanity issue, and we need to be willing to really look past I should say, push past the noise. Look past the obvious, and just really invite the Holy Spirit to help us to see a third way, and a third way not being that I'm going to hurry to Honduras. I can identify with that, but it takes a lot of creativity and it takes a lot of waiting on the Lord. God, what would you want me to do? How would you want me to respond? And I think some of the healthiest things to do, in my opinion, and I would love to talk about that a little bit, is to do it all in community. We learn best. Sometimes we want to learn in isolation, right? We want to, even behind a computer screen. I want to watch this webinar. I don't even know if I want to talk about it with anybody else. I want to have a lot of input. I think that's good as an initial start. But I am a very big proponent of pushing back just individual learning to more collective learning. And I think that there's this misnomer that you have to know a ton in order to do that. And what I love, even what you just shared, was a year ago, you didn't know very much. And even when you went to Oaxaca, you didn't know some of the push factors and even the other countries. And, I know I do know a bit just because where God has placed me this last decade or so, but I'm learning too. I learned so much on that trip. So what I'd like to do, like in our last maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes or so, is how could we like think beyond a partisan or a two-sided coin and really think of a third way? How can we welcome women into, responding in some of that third way response?
I think that God is always so gentle. He's always so gentle to
Mm-hmm.
help you along that way. So he's not going to shove you into something that's foreign. And sometimes we think we have to do the big missionary thing because to do God's work, it has to be uncomfortable and hard. And it might be right in front of you, something that comes really easily to you. It might even be a neighbor. It might even be a program that you haven't even seen. So I came back from Mexico, and the next day I was scheduled to speak at a women's event at our church. It was an all-day women's event, and it felt silly, to be honest. It just felt silly. Like, what are we doing? We're eating quiche, and teen girls are in Mexico, and they have no families. Anyway, it felt silly, and I know that that's common for reentry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But God, again, was so gracious. One, my pastor's wife walked in right when I did, and I could just say, I'm having a hard time reentering into this. And she's so great that she's been on international trips, and she got it, and she could resonate with that. And that's where we have community. And then I go to get my coffee to start the day, and it says, coffee provided by Hope Coffee. And that's what I wanted. That's what I needed in reentry. I need hope to know that God is bigger than this and that he's got things in place and I can partner with him in those things. And it was a Guatemalan coffee that this non-for-profit works with them, gives them more than a fair wage so that these farmers can stay there, because that's where God was leading my heart, was these families want to stay.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be safe, and they want their culture. Their culture is beautiful. Guatemala is beautiful. Honduras is beautiful. The people are amazing. They've got it better than we do here. I mean, it was a Tuesday afternoon in Oaxaca, and they're sitting in a square, families, enjoying the coolness of the trees and just celebrating. And on a Tuesday afternoon in America, I'd be in my car driving from one thing to the next. Like, they get family and celebrating. So I want them to be able to stay in the culture that they know, with the family that they know, with their grandparents and generations, instead of having to migrate. So then that's where God moved my heart. And the first thing he leads me to is Hope Coffee.
I love it.
That I could know, oh, there are things in place. How can I support those things that are in place? And that's where I'm saying God's gracious. So if he opens your eyes to one thing, he's going to open your eyes to the next thing and the next step. But it is having these conversations in community, but also listening to God and saying, okay, now show me, is that for me or is that not for me? Because sometimes I think we can think, I need to hustle and I need to swell and I need to do something that's more than he's asking you to do. And that's where we are in our pride thinking we're going to solve the problem.
Right.
And I think it's in humility that we partner with God and say, where do you have me?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
I think, no problem. I've had a little cold coughing myself.
I'm sorry, I'm going
The
to start coughing.
weather of the cough. I think that's kind of why I was pushing out the community piece, right? Is that that's when we're willing to risk some of those conversations. You're fine. We all get it. You know what I just realized? Why don't you go grab a drink, because I blew it.
Keep talking.
It's okay. I'm gonna take it. I forgot to tell you all, if you want to ask questions, you could ask questions in the chat bar. So I apologize. If you have any questions, please send them our way. I was just so caught up with talking with Heather, and we had just had such an important, really provocative and engaging time, and we're still really processing so much of it. So if you have any comments or questions in our last few minutes, please don't hesitate to send them our way, and we'll try to answer them. But I think what I was going to ask you is, you've got something going on tonight. It's just, right? And so it's in community. There's some conversations. I guarantee it's going to birth more conversations.
Right.
That's something, I always say we have to move past our awareness. Awareness in a vacuum is really, really good. But awareness is never enough to fix a problem, to really see things reversed, to be able to move towards a redemptive type of action. We really need to keep leaning in, and I know that that takes some risk, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I wish we had more time because you could tell us all the different conversations. You already kind of said, oh, I had a conversation with somebody, they got frustrated and angry with me, and I was just telling about my trip, and
Yeah.
and just even some of those little interactions, we need to keep pushing past some of those because we're all practicing. Even that woman who responded that way, she was practicing too. Her heart was
Yeah.
starting to break,
Yeah.
and she didn't know what to do with it. And so instead of backing away and avoiding it, that third way is, okay, let's breathe and let's see, why is God even having those emotions stir up with us? So tell, if you can. If you can't, I'm a talker, so I can keep
I'm
going.
like,
Oh, nice. Well, I was gonna say, I apologize to you, Heather. I'm asking you questions and
I
you're
can't
having, well,
talk.
all right. All right. Well, I'll just say what you're doing tonight.
Yes,
Okay.
please tell
Right.
everyone
And
what I'm
you
doing.
you cut me off and interject at any time. And I'm
Yeah,
gonna
I
say,
can't.
y'all, I don't really know that much. I just know that every single one of us who went felt compelled to share. And a few women live in Dallas. Heather lives in Dallas. Tex Clark with Seek the Peace lives in Dallas. And they're like, how can we tell other women? How can we create space of community to begin to look more deeply, not to look away, but to look more deeply and to be able to handle all the range of emotions of panic and frustration and, anger and grief and all of these different things that we don't usually make the space for because we have all of those emotions in our own lives. And how do we, really immerse ourselves, or at least begin to, I should even say immerse, touch our toes into the waters of learning. And so tell us, if you can, a little bit about tonight and how that came
I'll
about
try.
and what you're hoping for.
I can breathe. Okay.
Thank you
I
for your
might,
perseverance.
I might choke up again. Tonight, Tess and I, there's a link on Seek the Peace, and we welcome refugees. And maybe Sarah can add the link here. It's a free event here in Dallas, and we're going to answer questions, have a conversation. Tess has invited a friend who's going to lead a time of lament and worship and prayer. And so just a real casual time together here in Dallas tonight.
Will you be live streaming it all?
Someone asked me that. I haven't talked to Tess about that, but I did record a conversation with Tess about our trip. And that podcast will go live on Don't Mom Alone. I'm going to look up the date, June 17th. So
June 17th. Very good. Well, this is really just a journey for all of us. We're kind of intersecting at different points along the way. I'm just grateful for all of the friends that I've made because it's easier to learn and digest and creatively think forward when you are doing things. I mean, I'll just say, don't do life alone, right? Don't mom alone is good, but I don't want to do this alone either. And there's a lot of things. So I'm just grateful for all of the different people that have been willing to join us and listen alongside us and learn with us. And there's lots of different things that are going on around Welcome, and there's more to come. I'm pretty excited about different ways that we can begin to engage. And I'm just grateful for your leadership and for your willingness to say, you know what, I know I've got opportunities to learn more, and I'm willing to open my eyes to that and keep them open and see what God wants to show me, because the reason that He's given me a heart of compassion is so that I'll respond to what He shows. So, oh, there's one comment. So before I go ahead and have us sign off,
excuse me, guys. I'm so sorry.
well, you know what? We're just really grateful.
I don't know how to mute it. So
No problem. This is real. We're just people sitting on a video chat. You're out there
hopping away. Summer cold.
in
Yay.
Colorado. So thank you, though, for those of you who joined us and for those of you who listened to our conversation. Heather's story, as well as a couple other of our trip participants. Actually, we had a videographer. I don't even know what to think of.
Documentary team, I think.
Team. That's the more correct articulation. A documentary team was with us, and Heather's one of the people that they follow from beginning to end, and so that should be releasing in a couple months, and you'll be able to see and walk alongside Heather in her recent journey around Oaxaca. But Heather, we're glad to be able to share this part of your journey and look forward to a strong future of thinking creatively of how to create welcome in our communities.
Thank you for including me. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Bye, y'all.